Hey everyone, welcome to the Social Norms podcast, episode 3. Today we will be talking about educational inequality. My name is William, and my other host is Pranav, and we are joined by guests
Joel,
Kayley,
Timothy.
Like I said, the main focus of today's podcast is about educational inequality.
Okay, so a little introduction for inequality within schools. It's not only racial inequality, but also neurodivergence or learning disabilities, academic streaming, so the difference between academic and applied courses, religion, so for example, the discrimination of other people's religions in Catholic schools, and other things like income, seen in expensive school trips, status, sexuality, gender or sexual orientation, etc., etc. So just keep these in mind as we go through the questions. And with that being said, William, do you want to start us off with the first question?
All right, yeah. So our first question on educational inequality is, how does educational inequality manifest in our current educational system?
I guess I'll state the obvious to start us off. I'm sorry about that. Basically, what Pranav said at the beginning, educational inequality can manifest in many ways. It could be it can be based on your family's financial ability, your religion, culture. Maybe you might be someone who lives in an area that is pretty concentrated with one ethnicity, and you might not be a part of that ethnicity, and it's just a lot of variables that aren't really associated with education and trying to learn yourself, but they're part of education and like inequality.
I also think that like people in different areas get different levels of schooling based on how wealthy the neighborhood is, and like public schools in richer communities are funded a lot more generously compared to public schools in poorer neighborhoods. And by like sectioning public schools off in zones like this, they're ensuring that rich kids get a better education, which is unfortunate because kids don't get to choose where they live.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to clarify that the first speaker was Tim, second speaker was Kayley.
I believe they went over all the points, but I'll just say, like they said, your neighborhood, so where you live, might affect the quality of education that you receive. So, wealthier neighborhoods would have more access to more resources, so they would get, I guess, better schooling compared to poor neighborhoods where it would be more difficult for them to access the same quality of resources that wealthier neighborhoods get.
I also think that another point is that schooling. Oh, Kayley. Sorry, I'm Kayley. Schooling is very Eurocentric and doesn't focus a lot on other cultures. Like schools position Western education as like the center of knowledge. Like in history, we learn a lot about American history and not much about other cultures. And I think Eurocentric curriculums like this teach, I guess, minority groups that their lives and the lives of their ancestors aren't really worth learning about.
The next question we have is, what factors may be preventing parents from different races, ethnicities, or cultures from helping their children access educational resources?
So, Joel speaking, I believe one big factor that prevents parents from being able to help their children is language. So, especially the parents of immigrants, if they come to Canada and their first language isn't English, they will have a harder time knowing exactly what it is their children are being taught in schools. So they won't be able to know, and they won't be able to help them as well as they would be if they were able to speak English fluently and understand what goes on in the new country's education system. Tim speaking, I'd like to add on to that, which would be, you're absolutely right. There's probably a language barrier in a lot of cases for families, and also this reflects on how families might have, I'm sorry, parents might have grown up with education that takes forms in different ways, or they might not understand the ends that students growing up here might be trying to achieve. A thing like maybe university applications or extracurriculars, things like that. They might not quite understand that those are also necessary as well as proper education, and
it's these types of things that it's like a language barrier. It's like, I don't know, maybe call it cultural barrier, or just kind of a lack of experience for parents that may have just immigrated.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that a lot of immigrants tend to keep their head down because of the model minority myth and the stigma behind asking for help. So they don't really reach out and like help their kids out in school or something like that.
All right. Okay. So if no one would like to add on to that, we can transition over to our third question. So have you, or someone you may know, ever experienced being discriminated against by the educational system?
I've personally never experienced discrimination by the education system because I've always been very privileged going to primarily Asian schools. But in elementary school, my principal was like exposed for being Islamophobic through some of her Facebook posts. And I'm sure that it made a lot of my friends at the time feel very unsafe at school and uncomfortable.
I think I'm kind of in the same boat as, sorry. I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Kayley, where I've went to predominantly Asian schools, but interestingly enough, most of the teachers have been white Caucasian. I don't know what's the politically correct term. So it's kind of been interesting for me, where I I have a lot of kids with around me who are of the same ethnicity, but no real adults for most of my day were around me. And I've only started now in this school, started seeing, this school I'm in right now, started seeing teachers who might look a little bit more like me.
Joel speaking. I personally haven't experienced discrimination. I wouldn't say I have, even though I went to like a diverse school, because they had people from all races there. And I don't think I've seen anyone actually experience it, at least where I live. I wouldn't like to see it happen to anyone because it doesn't help with your educational experience.
So do you think teachers in schools or the board at large or in whole maintain sufficient efforts towards addressing social and education inequalities? And if not, what further steps can be taken in solving these issues by either the board or the government?
I do not think that they do. And I think that there should be a better reporting system and better guidance system as well. I know that a lot of my friends have had bad experiences with like the two, and there's this anonymous reporting system, right? But my friends report things on it, like they just report things on it, and it's supposed to be anonymous, but guidance usually calls them down and confronts them about it, like personally, which is really weird because it's supposed to be anonymous. And also with guidance, a lot of the times when students come to them to discuss problems, they don't really do much to help, except call their parents, which is sometimes not helpful to the student at all.
I think Kayley brings up a really great point, is that I think the school boards in general and teachers in general do want to do better for students and do want to eliminate inequality in education. But she's also right about how schools have their own policies. Well, as like part of the Board of Education, they have their own policies that they have to abide by, which might include if a student goes on to an anonymous helpline, or if just anonymous did, the board still has these policies where they might need to report specific cases, or they might not be entirely anonymous at all, and just that lack of communication with how much of this is actually anonymous, it could just discourage the majority of students from speaking up.
Yeah, and I also think sometimes schools are very hesitant about talking about certain subjects, like touchier subjects, that I remember we were trying to make a presentation for the school to talk about like anything, and we were pitching ideas, and we talked about, oh, let's talk about mental health, and then they were like, no, too touchy, cannot do that, which I thought was weird because I feel like that's an important thing to talk about. So I think sometimes we just avoid things, which is bad.
If Joel doesn't want to add anything, I think a little bit more of something a little more related to this would be that this really the level of inequality or just the teacher opinions on minority groups or inequality really differentiates between areas or different schools. Some more diverse areas will probably be more tolerant towards different cultures, different traditions, things that students might bring with them from home to school, type stuff. And other school boards and other schools maybe in less diverse areas would be a little less unaccommodating to student needs and student diversity, which is something to talk about. It's maybe more about the area than the school board itself.
Okay, so then just as a follow-up really quick to this one, is there anything you guys think any steps you think the government can take in order to combat this problem?
Yeah, I think as for government action, there should be more funding towards schools and teachers so that they can provide like adequate help or like tutoring or something like that that isn't solely reliant on volunteering and stuff like that.
I think I guess maybe if we're talking about inequality, maybe economics, the inequality, maybe some students might be less capable of doing homework after school learning or accessing technology based on the economic status. Then in that case, it would really be government programs that help families in general and help them gain the means to access education, especially now during lockdown, things like that. We're all virtual. I guess the government should, and I think they have been to a little degree, is help students access technologies if they can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So our next question is, how does educational inequality hold back particularly Indigenous people or other minority groups that you may know of from seeking future jobs in comparison to non-Indigenous people?
Timothy speaking. Just have to do that. One thing that I've kind of had secondhand experience, I don't know if that's the right term for it, but just listening to some friends that I have who do live in the Northwest Territories and such, I've noticed that teachers they really don't care as much as they can. There's a lot of I don't want to generalize at all, but it's just education the area in general just might not be as great quality as it could be. And there's also a lot of other social issues going on there that kind of distract students from focusing on learning. So I guess it would really just be about tackling problems that the entire area as a whole might have.
Well, yeah, Joel speaking. So, I can't say that I know any Indigenous person, so I won't speak directly for them, I mean. But from I guess the documentaries I've watched surrounding the Indigenous community and the learning facilities that they get, uh, I believe that they're vastly underfunded in comparison to a lot of us Ontario students closer to the south. So you see that their communities have I guess less children attending school, and in general there's just much less funding for them and much way less resources than we get. So I believe we should probably do a better job funding them, especially mental health resources for Indigenous students, because a big issue that affects them is suicide, and suicide is just not a good thing in general. So we should really strive to provide them with a better educational environment.
Yeah, I think someone schooling is like setting you up for your career in the future, and a lot of Indigenous people and other minority groups have worse experiences in school, which means that they're worse off by the end of it, which makes it harder for them to qualify for jobs in the future, which is not their fault.
I would like to add to Kayley's point is that the entire I don't think we can really look at education for over there as the same as over here just yet. I think that there's that a lot of students there might not even have the same end goals as us here. They might just be getting through high school just because the government told them they had to or such, and there's not really much that they can do over there um, with an advanced degree or something like that. So there's not much motivation to do well in school. I'm not saying that every student there is bad. Most of the people that I've talked to from those areas are quite excellent students, and they do have high hopes for the future. But they are one of a very few group of students.
Okay, so with that being said, we can move on to the next question, which is what are some strategies that you guys think that youth can implement to advocate for educational inequality? And on the topic of youth, how would you personally tackle this prominent issue?
Well, the big one, Joel speaking here, the big one that we see is youth call out educational inequalities. So I say we can continue doing so. So whenever we see something we deem unjust, we can call it out and speak to adults and other figures of authority about them so that some change is going to happen. And I guess we should involve ourselves a little more in decision making because a lot of youth, um, me personally too, we tend to avoid things that have to do with like tackling a lot of social issues and inequalities because it can get very messy while doing so. But I guess involving ourselves because change has to come about some way, so we can involve ourselves with these issues and help change the world and change inequalities in education to make it better for all.
Yeah, I agree with Joel. Like one thing that I might add would be to start informing students earlier on. I think what a lot of what happens very often is in high school we learn about these inequalities and other issues, and we want to do something, but sometimes it might we're also finding out a little later on into our career into our high school careers, and we're also thinking about going off into university and maybe leaving this area, and once we're gone there's not as much we can do. So maybe informing like younger students, maybe middle school, or just having them know of what's going on gives them more of a chance to do something once they get into high school than finding out halfway.
Yeah, I also think that one of the best ways that like youth can advocate for educational equality is by getting involved. Like for example, like in school clubs or something. Personally, like I'm on my school's equity council, which helps advocate for a more equitable school environment. And I also helped lead like a conference called Empower, which was an intersectional feminist conference. And I think things like these help us like strive for all students to have an even playing field, like, and by not holding back more privileged, like not by holding back more privileged people, but by elevating the quality of education of the people who are born into less fortunate situations. And yeah, I think by providing more resources through the public school system to help those who are falling behind by properly funding all schools and by like closing private school loopholes, we can create a more equal education system.
Um, Another strategy we can use is informing younger generations about these inequalities so that they understand what they are and they can also contribute their ideas to help us tackle and deal with these inequalities.
Okay, so thank you guys for all of your wonderful responses. This has been a really insightful experience for myself as well as Pranav, hearing all of your genuine responses. So we really applaud you guys for taking the step out of your comfort zone and coming on to our podcast to share your ideas, your own opinions, and we applaud you guys for that. Thank you guys so much for that. And for all of our viewers, regardless of what platform you're on, make sure you guys keep up to date with the rest of the Social Norms activities. We will be releasing one more episode in the near future, so keep an eye out for that as well. And if you would like, feel free to reach out to either the Social Norm team or any of our speakers. If you have any questions, concerns, or just anything you want to just generally talk about with them, feel free to do so. So once again, with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening or watching whatever platform you're on, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you for featuring.
Thank you.